Today I met with a couple in their early 50s hoping to retire in the next few years, and their number one concern about retiring before 65 was how to pay for health insurance. Looking at costs on the marketplace, they're expecting to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,000 a month for a high deductible plan, which frankly just makes them sick to think about. So what we did is we looked at planning strategies to help them overcome this hurdle, as well as smart planning strategies they can do today to set them up for the rest of their retirement. So in this video, I'm going to walk through a case study for some people in their 50s hoping to retire at age 60 and getting them set up on the right path. So without any further ado, let's jump right into this video. So like I said in my intro, today I met with a couple looking to retire in the next few years. They're in their early 50s. And they have a lot of challenges thinking about, okay, how do they invest their money in the meantime? How much can they really have for retirement? He works for a company with a 401k plan that gives him projections when he logs in. The 401k plan he uses is through Empower. And so he's got this little calculator with projections, giving him an idea of, oh, you can have this much if you retire at 65 or at 60 or whatever. And he's asking himself, okay, is that realistic? I mean, how close is that to reality? But obviously he has other investments. He's got other stuff going on that Empower doesn't know about. So he really wants a good overview and holistic view of kind of, what's realistic for his retirement. So like I said, the number one concern for somebody retiring before age 65 is often health insurance. If you go from being covered by your employer to all of a sudden looking at paying a couple $1,000s a month for often a high deductible plan, it's not very exciting for most people. So what I did is I put together a case study that goes through somebody who is 50 years old, has about $500,000 already saved for retirement, and they're looking, okay, what do I do now so that I'm set up, in the best place possible to retire at 60? So the first thing I want to do is actually share with you some health insurance projections, because before we get into any other, kind of projections of where they're at in retirement, let's just look at the possibilities for health insurance about what's realistic. What could they save with some smart planning? Okay, so on the screen in front of us, we're looking at health insurance projections for somebody who lives in the Nashville, Tennessee area for two 60-year-olds, husband and wife, and we want to look at what would regular health insurance cost without any subsidies. So the first thing is I'm going to healthcare.gov. Now, depending on where you live, the state you live in, you might have your own state website. Some state websites are great where you can actually, get projections, new estimates. Others are not as user-friendly. But for Tennessee, they use the federal website. So that's where we're looking. The first thing on the screen I want to point you to here is what would a high deductible plan cost without any subsidy? And if we zoom in here, you can see that this high deductible plan without any subsidy would cost $1,810 a month for the husband and wife at age 60. So, even if you are able to save up enough money to where you could afford to pay that, I mean, it's just it's unpalatable to think about paying that much for health insurance, especially a high deductible plan. So what I did is I said, okay, what if we were able to provide the cash flow they need, for the income they want in retirement, or from a tax standpoint, we're able to qualify for the health insurance levels, get their income low enough so they can qualify for subsidies. So for this couple, we're looking at them having an income, a modified adjusted gross income of $80,000 a year, which gets you just below that line for the Affordable Care Act. So what that line is 400% of the federal poverty line. Right now in 2025, it's like 83,000 and change. So 80,000 gets us just below that. And with that income level, they would qualify for a total health insurance premium tax credit of $1,781 a month, which takes this $1,810 a month plan down to $29 a month. So suddenly retiring before age 65 starts to look like a real possibility for somebody, which is awesome. I mean, if you don't have to work until age 65 because, just for whatever reason, you're done working, or you think you've got enough saved, or you got, you want to be able to do more things while your health is at its best, then this is really a crucial part of the planning. So now we have to look at, okay, based on what they've saved and based on the things they could do over the next 10 years from age 50 to age 60, what are the things they could proactively do so that they can save, this amounts to $20,000 a year of health insurance, which from age 60 to 65, we're talking over $100,000 a year, of health insurance paid for by the government instead of coming out of your retirement savings. So let's jump into their scenario and look at where they're at today, and then some of the recommendations that I would make in a situation like this to help get them in the best shape possible. So our retired couple here, Candace and Tucker Olson, they're 50 years old, and we're looking at them retiring in 10 years at age 60. So today, where are their assets? Well, they've got about $500,000 $100,000 saved in a 401k plan. And good news, they just paid off their house. And so they're looking at, all right, we're looking at, maybe maxing out our 401k at this point, or, doing something else. What's the best thing to do to get us set up for retirement? Because health insurance, it's like the center of their plan, early retirement. We got to figure out a way to be able to get that affordably. So option number one, they could go from just their regular contributions now to maxing their 401k. Okay, they're going to build up a lot more saving. It's going to be great, but that doesn't solve the issue of affordable health insurance at retirement, because when you pull money out of a 401k, even though you're over, they're going to be over 59 and a half, so they're not going to have to pay tax penalties, but every dollar they pull out of that 401k account is going to count as income, and it's going to eat away or eliminate that health insurance subsidy that they could be entitled to. So what we looked at doing with this couple is, instead of adding that extra money to the 401k plan, they would instead take the money that they were spending on their mortgage, and they would take that money and invest it into a brokerage account. So we're talking about, an investment account, and this could be anything. This could be simply adding the money into a money market account, through, where you're getting a good high yield savings, or through a brokerage account where maybe you can invest in some safe stuff like short-term bonds, or maybe even other stuff. But the key factor is that we want this money going into an account that it's after tax, where when they eventually pull money out of it, they have less of a tax liability because that money has already been taxed. Now, of course, we want to have some earnings in the meantime. So, there's going to be interest and dividends and that sort of thing that are going to have some tax liability. But overall, this is going to create the most tax efficient plan for them and really unlock affordable health insurance. Now, with their 401k, we don't want to just discard this and not contribute to it at all. In this case, Tucker actually has a match, so we're still going to have him contribute up so that he can get the maximum max from his employer. It's essentially free money. So for him, that's 5%. He'll keep contributing. He'll continue to put in 5%, get that 5% match from his employer, but then that extra money that would have gone to the 401k, he's going to put it into a brokerage account. We're going to build that up. So what does that look like for projections? Just using some very kind of conservative investment returns between now and age 60. Where does that put them at retirement? So I'm going to go to the next screen. Look on the screen here, this overview. So it's pretty incredible, but within 10 years, with some pretty conservative assumptions, we're looking at them having a balance of just over $2 million combined between the 401k plan and this brokerage account. Now, you saw in the beginning there, we started with only $10,000, but now they're going to be adding to it in earnest. And they were paying about $2,000 a month on their mortgage. That's taken care of now. So now all of that money is going to go into this savings account. So when it comes to investing into your different accounts, we have to think about timeline. When are you going to spend the money? For example, just an extreme example, the money that I need to pay like my Netflix subscription next month, I don't want to have that money invested. It needs to be totally safe and, whatever, it's going to be sitting in my checking account, right? And so if we kind of expand this analogy, money that you're going to be spending in the next couple of years needs to be invested very conservatively. And on the other hand, money that you're not going to touch for, let's call it decades. You can take a more long-term view with that money and invest it more aggressively, more with a growth mindset. So in their case, we know that in early retirement, most of their cash flow where they're going to be pulling from to meet their spending needs is going to be coming from this brokerage account. So what that says to me as their investment advisor or financial planner is that money needs to be invested very conservatively. On the flip side, the 401k money is not really going to be tapped into for several years down the road. Now, we already have 10 years between today and when they're going to officially retire, but then we're going to look in even further. It's going to be several more years before they start needing to tap into that 401k plan to generate money for cash flow. So that means that we can take their 401k plan and tilt it maybe a little more aggressively, maybe kind of beyond what the traditional 50-year-old would invest in, within their 401k. We can have it a little more geared towards stocks instead of more of a balanced portfolio. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, on top of this, now that they have this projected balance of about $2 million when they retire, how much income can they realistically have based on that plan? Well, you can see here, this summary, we're looking at a retirement paycheck of about $9,600 a month net. So that's after taxes. So if you're looking at this, you might be thinking, oh, that seems kind of high based on their portfolio value. But let's look at the cash flows, because their retirement is not just made up of their portfolio. Of course, they have Social Security, and in their case, both Tucker and Candace have a Social Security benefit. So we want to look at, okay, what's the way to claim their Social Security benefit that's going to, number one, hopefully maximize their Social Security income, but then two, maximize their overall plan, and three, it has to accommodate, it has to facilitate facilitate this strategy of affordable health insurance early retirement. So let's look at a chart of their cash flows over time and see what that looks like. So we're going to fast forward 10 years to when they actually retire. And you can see this yellow line here, this yellow block, we're looking at total monthly gross income. So in the first couple years of retirement, starting at age 60, all of the money is coming from the portfolio. So we're pulling money out of the brokerage account, and this is after-tax money. There's going to be a little bit of dividends, some interest, a little bit of capital gain recognition, depending on how it's invested in the meantime. And it's all coming from there. Then once we hit 62, we actually have Candace pulling Social Security. So she's been working, she has a benefit, and once she claims Social Security, now all of a sudden we don't have to draw on the portfolio as heavily. So this begins to make the portfolio more sustainable over time. There's less of a drag. Every dollar we get from Social Security is one less dollar they have to pull from their retirement account, which is going to help the portfolio over the long term. Now, they don't want to die with a bucket of money, just leaving, millions of dollars to their kids, but they do want to make sure that they're in good shape just in case they live a really long time or they need extra money for long-term care, that sort of thing. So once she claims Social Security, you can see that now they're getting now, if everybody watching this, you're like, what the heck? Claims at 62 and she's got $2,800 a month? Well, this is factoring in cost of living adjustments between now and then. And that's why this early benefit for her looks maybe a little bit on the high side. We have to plan for cost of living adjustments. And if you have any doubts about that, Social Security has been providing cost of living adjustments guaranteed every single year automatically since like the 1980s. Before that, they did it as well, but it was kind of on an ad hoc basis. I've got other videos for a deep dive on that one. That's why that number is a little bit higher than maybe what you would expect. So we're going along, and between age 62 and 70, all of their monthly cash flow and income is coming from the portfolio, Candace's Social Security. Now, once we hit 70 years old, you see Tucker's benefit kicks in, and his benefit's $6,700 a month. Again, we're factoring in cost of living adjustments. This is a long time in the future, and so that's why his benefit is so high. Now, once Tucker and Candace are both on Social Security benefits, you can see that they're only needing to pull out about $4,000 from the portfolio to hit their target monthly income, which, based on a $2 million portfolio, this is a very sustainable withdrawal rate, and it's going to really allow for their plan, for their assets to grow over time, to build up a nice tax-free nest egg for if they ever need to, need money for long-term care, or, they want to help out their kids or grandkids or whatever the case is, right? In retirement, there's a lot of things that come up that maybe you want to do. And so I don't think it's ever a good idea to plan on spending your portfolio to zero because you don't know when you're going to die, right? So, we got to have that kind of factored in there. So I mentioned that by the time they pass away or, later in life, they're building up a large tax-free portfolio. And now you're asking, well, how is that possible? Because all they have in the beginning is a brokerage account that they're going to build up and they're going to spend down early retirement. And then the only thing that's left is 401k. So where's the tax-free piece coming in? Well, that comes in with Roth conversions early in retirement. So I'm going to pull up my tax projections here. Now here on this tax projection, there's a summary. What we did is we looked at their retirement plan, factoring in, different withdrawal strategies, different Roth conversion strategies to try to kind of maybe hone in on what would be the most optimal to save them the most taxes, increase their income over their life, and increase their legacy over their lifetime. And so the strategy that's going to make the most sense for them is actually doing a 12% Roth conversion strategy. So essentially what's happening is that once they retire, they're going to begin living on the brokerage account, and then simultaneously, every single year, we're going to be doing Roth conversions, shifting some of that 401k money over to Roth. Now, that gets recognized as income. They have to pay taxes on it, but we have to do it just really making sure that we stay below that income line to qualify for affordable health insurance. And the 12% bracket is a pretty good, it's not exactly on, but it's pretty close to what that would need to be. Now, if we look at all the available strategies for what they could do with their retirement, right here in this column, we have average tax rate. And over here on the far left, we have all these different strategies. And if we go down, you can see that the plan we're choosing, this 12% Roth conversion approach, results in about a 6.5% effective tax rate or average tax rate over their retirement. Now below it, you can see there's some lower tax ones, some lower estimated percentages, like if they convert it up to, the Medicare IRMA 1 bracket or up to the 22% bracket. And we're kind of voluntarily choosing a strategy that has, technically a less optimal, overall tax profile. But the reason for doing this is to save them, to make affordable health insurance possible. If we did larger Roth conversions early in retirement to kind of have the most efficient tax projection over their life, well, what it would mean is more taxable income early in retirement, and they would not qualify for those, for those subsidies, which would mean they'd have an extra, based on our projections from looking at the healthcare marketplace, an extra $20,000 a year of expenses, which is going to further erode their portfolio, which means we have to take out more money. It would just not be good overall. That's less money they have to spend and do the things that are important to them. So when it comes to tax planning and projections, most of the time softwares won't factor in affordable health insurance. You have to kind of go, off and do it kind of separately in a spreadsheet to make sure that you're finding the plan, or finding the strategy rather, that's actually going to work for your situation. So overall, you can still see that if they do this, a 12% strategy, a Roth conversion strategy, compared to just, pulling money out of, kind of in sequential order, from their brokerage and then from their tax deferred, it's going to save them projected about 10% average taxes over their lifetime, which is saving about $3 million in taxes, which frankly, this is all for the more positive. So, we're all members of this big country. We all pay taxes. We're kind of in it together in that sense, right? We all want to contribute, but a dollar that you're able to keep, save in taxes is a dollar you can direct towards something that's more important to you. And ultimately, I would say, in my opinion, that's going to be better overall for all of us if we have more control over our own money and we're directing it towards the people and the causes and the things that are most important to us. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. Now, another concern that these retirees have is how are we going to manage risk once they retire? The last thing they want to do is retire early and then feel foolish, like, oh my goodness, we got to go back to work. And, if the market tanks, how are we going to manage risk and make sure, the plan can stay on track over our retirement? I mean, I know the software saying, hey, we can retire and have $9,600 a month net after tax and have affordable health insurance. That all sounds kind of great. But what's the process for managing risk over the life of the plan? So if you haven't seen one of my videos where I talk about guardrails, this is going to be new to you. For the rest of you, this is going to be a refresher. But essentially what the guardrail approach shows us is, and what it gives us is a framework for managing risk over your retirement. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, all right, we're going to start with your beginning portfolio, in their case, about $2 million. And that corresponds with about $10,900 gross. Okay, now, we're driving down the road. How do we know if we're on track and we're good? Or how do we know if we need to kind of slow down and make an adjustment? That's where the guardrails come in. So first, on the risk management side, let's say the portfolio drops from about 2 million down to 1.3, so 750,000. That's a drop of 37%. Well, based on all the projections, looking at their numbers mapped against the last 155 years back to 1870 of market data, what would they need to do to keep their plan on track? Well, if their portfolio dropped by about 37%, which is pretty huge, I mean, it's definitely possible, then what would we need to do? Well, to keep them on track, they don't need to go back to work. They don't need to just call it quits and the plan is blown up. No, we need to adjust their income by about 5%. So if they're willing to take about a 5%, little haircut in their spending, then that keeps the plan on track. Now, on the flip side, this is what happens in most often in my experience, is that, we plan for the worst, but a lot of times things go better than you're expecting. So what if the market's doing really well? Is it possible to increase our income? That's where the upper end of the guardrail comes into play. So let's say the portfolio goes up by 20%. Well, in that case, Candace and Tucker, they could realistically decide to increase their gross income by about 20% or $2,200 a month going forward. And so using this guardrail approach framework, this keeps them on track with a whole method of knowing, okay, how do we know that we're in good shape and that we're not just kind of kidding ourselves and kind of driving off a metaphorical cliff financially? This is the way to keep it on track over the life of their retirement. There's a lot of detail in this scenario that I'm not getting into exactly how to structure investments, all throughout their retirement plan. It's kind of beyond the scope of what I want to cover with this case study. But from an investment standpoint, important to note, and I mentioned this in the beginning, is that because they're going to be spending from this brokerage account early in retirement, that means that, all else being equal, that money needs to be invested more conservatively because we're going to tap into it sooner. And the last thing we want is that they're getting right up to the point of retirement and the brokerage account, has a drop of 40%. We really want to have it very conservatively, set up so that that's kind of, we're taking that risk off the table. And on the flip side, the 401k money that we know has a longer runway before it needs to be, kind of tapped into for income, that can correspondingly be invested a little bit more aggressively. And overall, that's how we're going to find a balanced approach to keep them on track from an investment standpoint. Hopefully this case study has given you some insights into how it's realistically possible for somebody who's 50 years old wanting to retire by 60, how they can make that possible given all of the challenges that somebody who wants to retire at 60 is going to face, namely affordable health insurance, managing their investments to make sure they're taking care of risk, and setting themselves up to be able to have a legacy to pass on or to take care of them later on in life. If this video has been helpful or you'd like some help looking at your own situation, click the link in the description to schedule a call with me. And until next time, you have a good one.